each also had an interesting relationship with things fall apart, and I think this is worth listening to and learning about, and that's where we should start. So I'll start with Chika, who, in honor of Things Fall Apart, and Achebe wrote an essay in Massachusetts Review, A Tale of Two Books. And the statement in that essay that really struck me was one where she went, "Nothing in my experience of literature since has ever had a strong effect on my sense of the sheer possibilities of writing." Can you expand on what it meant to encounter Things Fall Apart, what that means to expanding, on the sheer possibilities of writing?
Yeah, well, thank you all for being here. Thank you, Wale, for the very gracious introduction. So when I wrote that essay, in the context of what confronting or really taking apart for the first time it happened to me. So I grew up in a middle class home a very long time ago, which meant that I had access to books, right? But the books I had access to, like many people who grew up in middle class Nigerian homes in that time, many years ago, were mostly books from the West. So my parents would travel and they would bring back books. And so the African books I read were books that my older siblings had been assigned as reading lists. And many of them did like, so they asked me to read and they just give them somewhere. Oh, like they're spark notes, right? So I read everything from them. But also because I learned, people knew I loved reading. And so they'll give me books, right? So I read it, but I didn't have any research pens. So I wasn't discriminating what I read as long as it was written down. And someone, a social auntie around that time, before I read Things Fall Apart, came and gave me a book. And she was like, "Oh, you should read this book. It explains so many things. No wonder Nigeria is the way it is. No wonder the black man is cursed." And so this book was actually a pamphlet, right? Maybe 40 pages. And the thesis of the entire book was that the book started with a quote from Genesis, right? And then the thesis of the entire book was that God was that when Cain killed Abel, God punished Cain by cursing him with a stain on his skin. And that stain was black skin, right? And that was why, we were cursed. And that was really Christians, right? And then I want to be like Christians was heaven. And I saw the book of pamphlet went on to say that, so because, we were cursed and we'll never make it to heaven, I was like, oh my goodness, this is terrible. Like, I'm trying to do it, right? I'm trying to make heaven, and then I can't make it because of something I have no control over. But I couldn't talk to anybody about it. I was just coming to bed, like, this way and having and stuff, seeing the devil chase me around and all of that. And then, I can't remember how much longer after I read that book that I came to, that I read Things Fall Apart. And for the first time I read about colonization not as an enriching factor, but as a disrupting factor, something that came and disrupted the community that was living there, right? And maybe when I was 8, I couldn't have articulated it now, but that's the experience I remember. That, wow, so this existed, and more than enough, right? And no book has been able to do that for me again because I've already had an experience, right? So that's the importance of Things Fall Apart for me. It came at a point where I was so convinced that I shouldn't aspire to anything. I shouldn't aspire to heaven because I was bad. And also, the middle class was in school, right? So good schools, if you spoke vernacular, you spoke your local language, you were punished. You were told that, Uncle Pat discovered River Niger. I see people who've been going there, taking water there, didn't exist. So nothing existed before colonization. And Achebe's Things Fall Apart was like a realization for me, or like an articulation for me, that we existed, things existed, but there was a colonization there, right? And this was just a different type of a disruptive influence on the colonization that was already in existence.
Now, was that a similar experience for you? Did you encounter this novel as growing up or as a child? How was your...
Yeah, to be honest, I can't say this is the very first, time, the first moment when I encountered it, when I read it. So, to start with, I didn't study literature in secondary school because I did sciences. There was a time when I was writing science students. So I never went to study things fall apart in school. So I read it. I think when I was growing up, there were always books in the house. I have older brothers, and they would read their books and they would drop them basically these tattered copies of books. And I remember the cover was being called an edition with the folkloric drawing. I can't remember the name of the person who wrote the introduction for the artist, but that volume for many things at that time. So, let me go back. Maybe I should talk a little bit about Achebe before I even talk about the book itself, because I know that I've had the privilege of meeting him in person and working with him. So let me just say what he meant to me before I really talk about the book. So he is the reason why today I'm in America, working in America, because after I won the Christ and I moved to England, and I was living in England, my first book came out, and I was working on my second book. I was starting a PhD at the University of Zambia. And then one day the phone rang, and my wife said, "You know, I think it's on the phone for you." He said, "Yeah, I think it's on the phone for you." So I thought she was kidding me. And then he was on the phone, and he asked me, "Would you want to come to America to be the first Achebe fellow?" I was like, yeah. I didn't think about it. How come? So I did the Achebe fellowship for 1 year, and I got to meet him, be at his house, meet his family, hang out with him. And he was such a very, very nice person. And you can see why the book is so great, because he was a great man, very soulful. And so that's really my encounter with him. So there's the book, I'm talking about the book itself. I encountered it when I was kind of aspiring to become a writer. So there was that first moment when I first read it, bits and pieces I didn't read from beginning to end. Then later when I was at university, I wanted to be a writer. And I read it. And by then, of course, I had read, all the post-colonial, I was going ahead of colonialism and people. But you see that I have really good work and that as an internet. Not just really reading the letter that was on the time, even other things in the literature. So there, really the essays around it. And I should also be saying why I wrote the book. Because of course, after that, those barriers to the you can go on to wanted to show that Africa wasn't the line colonialism. Okay, it's different. This is such a heavy thing, from the writer to discover that. That's it, that's how we're looking at literature. But to be honest, I wasn't looking for that kind of model and stuff. I wanted a different kind of writing, because writing is always decided by the milieu in which you are writing, in which you grow up, in which you live. I was living in the 1990s, trying to be a writer, and the things that concerned me at that time were the pro-democracy movement. This was the decade when Ensariola was killed, when Nelila was killed. And for me, things fall apart was something that, in the distant past. I was looking for a different kind of model, and I couldn't find any. Because it was so successful, basically all the writers writing around that time were basically imitating it all apart.
Well, you've written about that before,
yeah.
CSIO Giving about this one of the chapters.
All right.
Sorry.
So I was looking for a model, and there's this point of this book that you feel as if you have to. But I didn't want to write a book set in a village, for instance. I didn't want to book that people be talking in proverbs. you know. All that wasn't relevant to me, you know. So then eventually I discovered the books of Marchera. Stylistically, this was what I wanted to do. You know, the modernist, kind of non-linear, non-traditional, fragmented kind of narrative. And the books of Marchera did that for me. It was until much later when I was writing my second book, I actually went back to the Achebe model. But it shows that you can't escape the fall, you eventually have to come back to it. But at that moment, that wasn't what I was looking for. So there's this kind of love-hate relationship, you know, with the book. You can't escape it, but it also determines what you do. Even as you try to escape it, you are actually in dialogue with it. So I say our writing has always been in dialogue with the fall because that's an important book. You can never write. Yes.
Firstly, how I got into things was about the canon. I was also a science student here, and I studied science, and I didn't. You're right, that's what it was. So that informed the decision to study in the science class, and I still read things from about in secondary school, but it was also at the time where my friends in the art class was studying things from about. So like, hey, I picked up a copy and I read it. But the thing was, in my coming across things fall apart, I feel firstly the most people from previous generations who encountered things fall apart came at it from two different ways, right? Firstly, they had destroyed Africa, and things fall apart was them rereading Africa, and they could see themselves in the mirror properly. And there was also the legacy of reading African literature around that time for the first time. For me, I read things on the plot after I read Popular Discuss and after I read certain books, right? So I've already had seen myself in the mirror moment. And even from my generation, I read the Currency Fire and I read the CMS Black. So I also had experienced writers of that time. So when I was reading Achebe, it was stripped of the luggage of his legacy. It was just another book, right? And I think I appreciated it as just another book. And yes, I tried to think about how things fall apart was the greatest book in African literature and how it was the most seminal work. And reading it as just another story, I didn't see any of that. Exactly, I didn't see how it was incredibly world beyond etc. Security and military, right? So, but then again, I would say once later, we reading, especially the non-fiction, the dedication of the British protected child, where he discussed it, its influences as well, and just reading other things. Literally, like reading what everybody read before things fall apart, the misreading of African things before things fall apart. I then could appreciate where he was coming from and what he stood for. And also, just in terms of, I feel as writers, it's very rare that people create in isolation. So it's always a collaborative effort, directly or indirectly. It could be an option of workshopping or sharing with readers, conversations with other readers and writers, reading what you're caring to do. And I think in the discussion around Achebe and things fall apart, we don't really, in a lot of the conversations, not taking into consideration that he's never writing in isolation. Because he came from government college in Rwanda, went to university college in Ibadan. And these are institutions where they had great thinkers and writers. Equity had published before him and was his peer in university. And he also had at some point, straight career and people, and there were also great intellectuals that I read there. And even when he, in other essays, when he discussed it with Mr. Johnson and Out of Darkness, he references conversations he had in class with these people. Right? So when you see things for the past, you can see it as a product of a generation's thinking, and not just his individual opinion. And also reading beyond things for the past, reading about that generation. Yes, he edited the African Writers series, and obviously his imprint on his stamp on the work that came up with their similarities will have his own fingerprint on it, right? That's why we read other writers and be like, this is Achebe, right? And everybody from the generation is copying on one. Well, not really, because they made this both together. Is how I like to look at it. And going forward, from my generation, rewriting African tradition, African mythology in
easier to replicate even in the modern day. And I think that's what a lot of people try to do. So we are not necessarily trying to rewrite things all apart, but we are looking at the way, the thought process behind the way he came about, his things that were considered when he came about, and
So something that I want to kind of open up to, to the panel is this idea of, who owns this number? Why is this an important number? We talked about this, behind the scenes and kind of just like, I guess rift on it. But it's this idea that, you have this really important number, and I guess for someone like me who is, in their 20s, really trying to figure out why this number became what it is. I'm wondering, is this number important because it's important to Igbo people? Is it important because it's important to Nigerians? We don't necessarily talk about it all the time. Or is it important because it's important to, like I said, the world? And oftentimes when we say the world, what we mean is, the West. Is it important because it's important to the Western establishment? And I want to kind of get, some thoughts on this. Why is this number important? Is it one of those things that has going into that cycle of publishing where you get feedback from the world, or is it something whose influence is rooted here and still rooted here?
I think it's important because it's canonical because it's important. Let me say it that way, and it's important because of when it was published.
Sure.
Right? It's important because of it came out in 1958, right? 1958, Nigeria was an economy, right? And then we have this book, which is, really tearing the whole issue of colonization apart.
Yes.
So it's important for that reason too, right? And it's important because, really, I think that no matter what you write, it's not a good book, right? It's not going to stand the test of time.
Sure.
And of course, we can't discount the importance too of, who did the reviewing, who were the critics, what they were saying about it. Because very often we take what's important when we decide that something is important, we kind of this thing that is important. If you told this is important for you to read this, right? And it's coming from the New York Times, and it's coming from the Guardian, it's coming from whatever else, we tend to take that more seriously, right? But I think that all those are incidental, right? I think that this other part is important because it dared to say what it did at a time when Nigeria was still a colony, right? And it was published in the West at a time when the West didn't want to hear the sort of thing that he was saying. In African countries, we agitated for independence at that time, right? And sort of go back to the colony, to go back to the colonial master and say, you guys have disrupted the civilization that was there. Why did you come, right? It's a very powerful thing to do, because it's very easy for the much younger generation not to understand that, right? That what he was doing was radical. He was very radical, right? Before Achebe, the Mosquito Alarm had published. But the Mosquito Alarm's books didn't question the idea of colony in the way that his was approaching. And I think therein lies its importance. The fact that he dared to question the colony and to question the power in the power dynamic at the time that it did so. People question it now, right? It doesn't quite have the same impact because it's already been done. We've gone somewhat beyond that, right? And so I think it's very important to remember when it was written, what was going on, in Nigeria.
Well, I think you definitely raised some really interesting points because, as you were speaking, more just like, what I'm reminded of is that, Zig says something, which is that progress is never done. We must be reimagined.
Yeah.
When I think about things for artists, if you speak to, there's a sect of Nigerians, and probably it might be jokes, it might not be jokes, who have this idea that our country isn't working, maybe the British should have never left, that kind of thing. I don't know if you've heard that before, or, we should have been colonized longer, or we should be recolonized. And people say these things because people don't necessarily understand what it means to be a colony and what it means to be colonized subjects. And I think that novels like this kind of really expose that, and are still relevant for that reason, specifically. But I don't know if you want to add.
In terms of pushing African literature forward or propelling it, this one that is also at the forefront of it. When Achebe became editor of Heirs and Africa, he published, I don't know, 20, 30, how many books? Yeah, a lot. He published Boogie, he published, all the names that are now, known as the founders of African literature. Achebe was instrumental in the publishing of Rapa, and I think that if he hadn't published when he did, right, the situation might have been difficult, but have been different. And because Heirs Africa existed when he did, we're able to see that here now as writers, right? So,
to add to that, it's important for all these reasons that you mentioned. And also, it's very rare, to have a book that defines the whole generation, the whole period, not just in Nigeria, but all over Africa. So when it came at a time when you had the Pan-African movement and the nationalist African movement, and in essence, it became like the anthem. This is one book that you can take and say, this is it. I don't even need to say anything, just read this book. It says everything. There's an essay, I think, by Simon Ikandi. It's called Chino Achebe Invention of African Culture. He said, as far as he's concerned, that Chino Achebe invented African culture. Not that he invented African culture, but in the sense that he put it inside the book. And sometimes, because we're in this kind of space where for anything to have word or to be taken seriously, you need to hold it, you need to write it in the book, and to be able to take it and travel with it to the library for people to read. So actually it did all that. And it's also very hard to find a book that takes into cognizance and practicalizes all the theoretical aspects, the politics of that time. So there was politics of language, as people were asking. She writes in English language, she writes in European languages. Actually didn't only suggest that this is what we should do, he actually did. So when you look at things all about, even though it's in English, it's not just any kind of English. It's South African English, English, it's not English. So he did all that. So it's almost as if he is putting down the blueprint for other writers. This is the way to go, this is the way to go. And people sometimes come to him, even though he was the first one to always say that I'm not part of the literature, But that's how people always go back to him and say that he's part of the literature because he did all these things. He showed you how you combine these two traditions. The conflicting, two spaces of tradition and modernity. They don't have to be in conflict. You can actually harmonize them and create this text that takes both aspects and put it inside one book. So we did all these things.
That's what you want to add.
It's pretty much most of what they said, but it's also emphasizing on the fact that yes, a lot of, to answer your question directly, right? Say the strongest of Western of in Nigeria, South Africa. I think it's both because I would say regardless of the impact it had in the West, Nigeria and South Africa we think about at that time, we still have to be talking around, we still have to we still have inspired him to do things with culture and with language. And for the Western reader, it was published exclusively in the West and never been to Nigeria. We still have the correct content. We were showing the new picture of Africa and what can be done from the continent of our continent. So I feel those two legacies are just as valid and just as important. And yes, it did a lot in breaking stereotype of what's going to South Africa, but to an extent as well, it also became a stereotype of what's going to come out of Africa. Because we've spoken about the fact that African things about how everything was a similar one, but even going forward from the very beginning, what was considered as stereotypical picture still has to follow a certain mode of being very, pro-nationalism or culture or very serious issues. Because like you said, Solar was in that same era. And yes,
So before I open up to the audience and questions, I wanted to just ask one final, just get one final thought. And I think this is more answer, but even within the philosopher speaks of this idea of constantly inventing Africa, or you think of Africans in invention. It really comes to mind when you're talking about someone like this essay. And for me, one of the things I find interesting is that 60 years after things fall apart, which is like the landmark African novel, can we still speak of African literature? Is Africa still a reliable theorized literature from the continent? And the reason I ask this is because from our discussion, we are publishing nowadays diversity of writing. I mean, from writing that occurs online, fast fiction, all of that. As in a novel, can we still speak of Africa as this label that we use to categorize writing?
Fair enough. So I would say in what it meant to be an African writer before, I feel the meanings are changing and expanding, right? So before, an African writer was African wrote about very African things. But now it's getting much more broad. I remember having a conversation on Twitter with Tolu on a program discussing identity and how whether or not Tetro is an African writer. Right?
He's already given the answer to that.
Exactly. And I mean, some people claim him, whoever teachers to claim, and even in terms of stories, whether you're living on the continent and still writing about other things, and even the things you choose to write about, be it fantasy or really imaginative or things that, just like I said before, we're not taking as seriously before as what should be stereotypical literature. We have people now who are in the express mode in which spoke for himself and his generation. We have people speaking to your identity. There's almost a louder voice regarding literature about queer narratives in Nigeria and Africa. Also, just because a lot of other things, right? People are doing more interesting things with language and with form and with genre as well. So what is, when you say African literature, I think it's constantly being redefined and it should be allowed to evolve. I don't think we should look to define it and create a box, but it should be allowed to evolve the same way literature everywhere else has evolved into, American literature has gone just being the pop now, like this era type of novel, right? There's so many things now, and we should allow our literature to evolve, in my opinion. So exactly.
Yeah, it's always problematic, to a writer, especially in terms of who's not even an African writer. If you call a writer in Nigeria, I wouldn't mind, because we know what we're talking about.
Yes.
But if you are calling a writer outside of Nigeria or outside of Africa, then there's a certain assumption that you can only be this kind of writer. It's trying to put you in a little space, in a little box. So it's always problematic. But you have to go back to how that kind of originated. It began with the Pan-Africanist movement, with the anti-colonial movement. And basically, everybody at that time was happy to become African and was kind of projecting one unified front against colonialism. And we had similarities in our culture, in our tradition, and everything because we're facing the same challenges. So it was actually easier to become an African writer at that time, which was very positive. Then you had independence, and then you have these countries. And now it becomes more problematic. Am I an African writer, or am I a Nigerian writer? Am I a Ghanaian writer? And then it gets even more difficult because the relationship, I think, of the African with the nation state is always going to be a difficult one. Because by saying that I'm a Nigerian writer, I'm actually kind of accepting, well, it's very hard to say what's Nigerian anyway. Then you're also accepting the fact that this nation was kind of arbitrarily constructed by the colonialists, so you're kind of endorsing it. So sometimes it's easier to be an Igbo writer, at least that you can say that you're an Igbo writer, you're a Igbo writer, or whatever. But say imagining. So every book that we write now is kind of adding towards that. So eventually we're going to arrive at what the Nigerian ideal is. But our writings, our theories, our thoughts, and everything we do is kind of geared towards that.
I think I just want to start off by saying that so I want to take the African writer label, right? So I'm an African writer. I have no issues with that. But I'm also aware of the burden that that carries in certain spaces. But then my duty in that space is to disrupt what being African or being an African writer means, rather than rejecting the label completely because that isn't her at all, right? And having said that, I think that this anxiety about who's an African writer, what's an African writer, that we get from others, even in Africa, right? Isn't an anxiety that writers from other places face. British writers just around thinking, no, hey, British writers are men, right? Because they know, I've been writing whatever I think we call a British writer. American writers don't get, panels and then ask you, who's an American writer, for example. Let's suppose you're asking about, race and ethnicity and racism and ethnicity and identity in the Trump of era, in the era of Trump, sorry. It's even confusing. Which is something completely different, right? And so being aware of it's like I lived in London for 20 years, 15 years. And just a quick anecdote, right? So I had a master, I had a BA, I had a master's, I was working on my PhD, and I wanted a job. I was like taking a break and so on, regain my sanity. And so I walked into an employment office. And I said hello to the woman working there. And I said very politely, I said very politely, I'm looking for a job. She takes one look at me, she sees black, she sees woman, she sees foreign, and then she says, yeah, I've got a job for you. We need a cleaner, you can start today. Yeah. So I said, well, I need a cleaner too. Because I don't like So I'm aware that there are spaces where you are, and these levels acquire, different burdens, right? And my duty in that space at that time, or my obligation, right, is to confront, is to be confrontational and to disrupt it, so that next time you see a black person or you see an African writer, you don't think, okay, I know all about African writers. African writers just don't write, fantasy. They just don't write political fiction. They just don't write whatever. We do a lot of other things. And I think the more we write, we're all different people. We all have different interests, right? And so the more we present these things as African, right, the more we disrupt that notion that being an African writer is this monolithic thing that we have to be anxious about.
Thank you so much. Okay, let's open it up to the audience. What we're going to do is, if we have enough time, we will take the first set of questions and then let them answer, and then take a process.
My question is for Chika. Do you think that things fall apart inadvertently put pressure on generations of African writers to only write about culture and disruption and politics? And then the other question is for Nnamdi. I can see your bias for Ekwensi. Do you think that Ekwensi should have been the Achebe? Because you've been talking about it. And I kind of understand where you're coming from, seeing as Ekwensi was writing African stories that were human in an era where Africans were dehumanized. So do you think that Ekwensi should have been the Achebe of his time? Thank you.
Okay, so we will take another one. Any other questions for now? Okay, I thought I saw a hand over there. Okay, yes. Yeah, okay, sure.
When I teach this novel, I think increasingly my students want to talk about gender. And on the one hand, you have people like Karen King or Ruby Sala making the argument that it's a sort of feminist novel because it shows almost the implosion of a certain flawed idea of masculinity. On the other hand, many of my students, I think especially women students, find the abuse of women deeply offensive and say, why are we even reading this novel? So I'm curious about your take on that.
Okay, so we will take those three first, and then if we have enough time, we'll take another set.
You want me to start? Okay,
Yes,
so
so
just
you have
answer.
your-
I think that, well, thanks for that question, first of all. But I think that any novel that does well puts a pressure on the novels that come after it. Secondly, publishers are also incredibly lazy sometimes, right? Yes. But it's also a money-making business, right? And so this book does well. You're looking for models, right, that you think you're looking to replicate something that will do as well for you. And so the West is London and New York, right? And the gatekeepers to get into that center of publishing, right, they don't look like us, right? So these are British and American agents. So, first of all, they have to understand your work to sell it. And then they sell it to an editor who is also removed from you. That editor doesn't have any relationship with you. The editor is not somebody that you can send an email to at 9 p.m. and say, oh, have you finished reading the novel? What do you think about it? That editor is removed from you, is also American or British, right? And has to also get the novel, right, before they publish it. And now you as an African writer, you get a contract, or before you get the contract, it tells you, well, the novel is great, but the editor wants you to do A, B, C, D, E. And you're not thinking, okay, do I do this and publish? Or do I say, well, to hell with you and not publish? But then what are your options, right? So luckily now we have cassava, we have farafina, we have quail in South Africa. And I think the more we grow, we have Parisia books, am I missing anyone? We have Wida, of course, yes. We have Wida books, but Wida hasn't published me yet now, so. Sorry. Yeah. Anyway, so we have all these, right? And I think the more that these ones are the ones publishing our works and then pushing them to the West, right? The more we see that sort of narrative changing. So now you're not getting books that an editor in New York says, oh, okay, this is the book we want to publish because this one has done well for us in New York,
yes,
right? Now you're having people like us, like you, reading the work. You're not having to explain things to them, right? You're not having to tell them, well, so you're not getting, for instance, you're not getting a comment like, oh, but how come your characters eat pork? Because in Nigeria, people don't eat pork. Now you're getting people like you who understand. So the questions they're going to be asking are much more productive, right? And they're not going to be wasting time on silly questions, right? Yeah.
All right, Namdi, you had a question as well.
Okay, so firstly, no, I don't have any particular bias or equivalency. I think where I do have biases, I hide my bias as well, right? My favorite writer from that age is easily by far Soyinka, and if not for this question, I'd have gone through this entire panel without mentioning Soyinka. So I think I kept repeating it because I'm more concerned about, like I said when I was speaking, I'm more concerned about the ecosystem, recognizing the ecosystem in which we create. And creation is not done in isolation, because starting out as a writer, there was a tendency to be very, very isolated in the way you create, because that's the way it's put forward to you. In other art forms, be it like music or film, like you can see the collaboration in process. In writing, not so much, because now we know Achebe. We don't know how many drafts of readings, like how many editors went through it, and even like Wale also mentioned, even the legacy built around it was also helped by the people who reviewed it, who spoke about it, who championed it. And a lot of this isn't done in isolation. And now, I feel like the African literary scene, like Chika also mentioned, is evolving. So we have a lot more publishers who are Africans and who understand the narrative more. We have festivals, we have workshops and residencies. And even on social media, there's a space to build a brand as a Nigerian writer in Nigeria. There's a community of people you could share your work with and have conversations around your work. If you put out an essay or a short story, yes, you'll be discussed online, you'll be discussed in group chat, and the feedback would get to you at some point, positive or negative. So, but we are recognizing that there's a community, and that's for me what I'm trying to highlight, that not necessarily having an Achebe of a generation or an Equincy of a generation, but having, most importantly, a generation.
Sure. So we had a question on teaching things fall apart, especially on gender and teaching, things fall apart.
The American students thinking that that the novel that the women are abused, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And so I wanted Helen to answer that because you teach.
What was the question again?
So
Sorry.
it's on teaching. So basically, it's a question about teaching things fall apart, and this idea that it's not a feminist novel. That in fact, there are sections of the novel, particularly with female students, that kind of resonate negatively, especially with how the wife
In America.
In America.
Yeah.
Specifically in America. Yes, for context. Yes.
Yeah, it's a complicated novel, and whenever you read it, you discover new things. So the assumption on the surface of it, when you read it, is that it's a book that is talking about this highly masculine, almost toxic, masculine society.
Sure.
That puts so much emphasis on achievement and manliness, and you're not supposed to even be nice to your own children.
Yes.
But then you reread it, and you see that he's also giving space for women in the book. They have power, like the priestess. When Achebe was the young girl,
Yes.
Obanjo,
Yes.
and the kind of power that women have in the society, and in the house as well, because they determine basically what you eat and what you do in the house. They have their own farms. It's not just the husband's farm. It's their own. They produce their own food and all that. So there are all these things that the book mentions. I think people sort of expect it to be this kind of, to talk about women in a way that we do today. But he is writing about a certain time in history. And that's what life was at that time. And he had to be true to that time.
Yeah.
But even then, he managed to make women strong. Yeah.
Thank you. And it's sort of like dovetailing into that, right? I think that there's a tendency for us, right, in this day and age, and for American students, right, especially, to read the now,
Yes.
right, into cultures that they don't understand,
Sure.
right, which is sort of a difficult thing to do. It's also an arrogant thing to do, because you don't see that there's a culture outside of your own. So on Wednesday, just before I left, I taught a class, right? And we read a short story by a Chinese woman, translated into English, and she published this short story in 1992. And in the short story, so the culture is also patriarchal, and the mother scolds the son, who thinks he's done something good for the mother, but he's gone about it the wrong way. And so the mother scolds him and then hits him, right? And so one of my students said, well, I don't understand why he just stood there and took the mother's abuse. Which is, and I'm like, and I told this, I said, I read this book I read this story a long time ago in Nigeria, and I wanted you guys to read it because it's one of my favorite short stories. It sort of like stayed with me for a long time. And it never occurred to me to think of the mother slapping the boy as abuse, right? I was thinking, so I said, well, what should he have done? And she said, well, he should have, I expected him to say something to the mother, and I said, sure, okay, Chika. Obviously, it's a different, it's a different different context, it's a different, because I'm sure, 50 years ago in America, the switch was still being used, right? So my student's grandmother would read that same story and not have the same, not come to it with the same, not have the same reaction, thank you, not have the same reaction, right? And I also think that what Achebe does in Things Fall Apart is to realistically portray the society as it was back then,
Yes.
which it wasn't all good, and he never says that it was all, people were sitting around
He's not trying to
singing
romanticize it,
kumbaya. Yeah, he did
yes.
romanticize it, right?
Yes.
And I think that also when we read works, especially African works, right, with the framework of let me say Western feminism or modern feminism, you get into trouble. There's something that Obama Nemeka, who is a scholar and a professor in some American university, came up with years ago, and she calls it nego-feminism, right? Which is short for no ego feminism or negotiated feminism, right? And I think if you read Things Fall Apart, within the framework of negotiated feminism or neo-feminism. You understand that even though these women were living in and patriarchy is never good. I have to watch what I say because Mona is right in front of me. So, patriarchy is never good, but, no, there's no but. There's no but. No. So, but having said that, what Achebe tried to show was a society which, an Igbo society did have that, where women also had their own spaces, right? And those spaces were not always equal to men's spaces,
Sure.
right? And which is why feminism is important,
Yeah.
and why neo-feminism doesn't always work,
Yes.
right? But I think American students should learn to read, works, bearing in mind that there's a world outside of America.
Sure.
And also bearing in mind that this is written in a specific culture, specific context. But you can doesn't mean that you can't interrogate it.
Sure.
You can interrogate it, but you should interrogate it from a place of knowledge and
Yeah.
respect. And that
Of
makes all the
recognizing that the
difference.
context.
Which is what I mean by respect, by
Of
recognizing that different context, different culture, etc., etc., etc.
And it's also good to also
That's such a half-hearted clap.
I interrupted him, sorry, you have to also writers also kind of evolve and their books kind of move on.
Sure.
So when you read things fall apart, you should also read like The Antis of the Savannah and look at what Achebe has done in that book.
Precisely.
All right, thank you so much. So we will take our final round of questions. We have a few minutes. So what we're just going to do is really quick questions. Obviously, feel free to punch hard, but really quick questions, please. All right.
Good afternoon, everybody.
Okay.
My name is Michael Chidozim Chukudera. My question is concerning African writers, the issues bordering around the label, being called an African writer. Does it, I don't know, I don't understand it. I've been reading about it for years and years, and I don't understand why some writers are against being called African writers, and some writers don't have a problem with it. And, well, if I was to say, I would have said, okay, probably it doesn't matter, because I remember reading somewhere where T.S. Eliot said, before an artist becomes universal, he must first become local. We are talking about Things Fall Apart, for example. It's a very, very local novel, written in a very local context, in a very small village. But it's more like a universal book now when we talk about it. I remember reading...
Sorry, please. Sorry, but what's the question?
Yeah, the question, yes. I know I'm coming. I'm just... I'm talking about based on what we are talking about, when we are discussing here. We said some of what validated the novels were the reviews and all that. I don't think those were what really validated the novel.
Not validated, though. We didn't use the term.
No, I heard something. Okay, I heard something like, because
I'm so sorry, man. What's the question?
The question is, why does it have to matter? As in the African writer debate on African writer was really the problem there, because the best novels we know are local novels today. Even Anna Karenina is a local novel. Things Fall Apart is a local novel. It's just that the human condition rhymes. So why?
No. Thank you so much.
Why is it?
Sure. So your question is, why is there contention around the label of an African writer? Noted. Second question, please. Okay, we have one in front.
Hi, my name is Khadija. My question is, what is the future of African literature? And I ask because at the beginning you discussed Ngugi, and I know he has a big philosophy about African writers writing in African languages.
Sure. So we have another question on what is the future of African literature. We have one over there, actually, and then we'll take that one, and that's the end.
Hello, my name is Norma. As regards being defined as African or Nigerian in our literature, what are your thoughts on language usage, on italicizing or othering our mother tongues while writing primarily in Western languages?
Sure. So that ties into Khadija's question. Okay, great. We have one over there at the back, black hat. I mean, I'm the only one allowed to wear hats to events, so I don't know what is going on. So maybe at the end of this panel, we will all wrestle. Yes, we will all wrestle. There's only one hat allowed in Lagos, please.
So my question is, there's a current surge of African and black artists that's been happening within the past couple of years. I guess the question I have is, how likely is this to be sustainable as opposed to just being a flash in the pan? Because this has happened before, where the interest in black or African artists has come, and then it's suddenly just gone into the background. How likely is this sort of rise to continue and not fade again?
All right, sure. Thank you so much. So that's all our questions. So the first question was, why is there contention on the label of an African writer?
I've spoken a little bit about that,
Sure.
about why it's problematic, because it depends on who uses it, who calls you an African writer. Sometimes it's done to put you in a ghetto, so that's why it becomes a problem. You said that all writings are local, you mentioned some writers who are local. All writing, is local. Because writings are set in a locale, so that makes them local. You're writing from where you come from. It's the characters, the story that transcend the locale itself. And that's why I think Things Fall Apart is so international in that sense, and people who are non-African can read it and see themselves in it. So all good books try to show human beings, not just as Africans or Europeans, but as, a father or a mother. And if you do that, or a brother or a sister, or a farmer or whatever, or a jerk, and if you can see that, you can relate to it, and then it transcends that particular place where the person lives, it becomes universal because you're just portraying a human being.
All right, thank you so much.
All its complexities. Yeah.
Sure. Thank you so much. So we had another question. So we had another question on the future. Yes, on the future of African literature. So there are two. It's a similar thing. So you can actually take the tour.
But the one I want to answer is the one on writing in Western languages.
Yes. So we had one question on Ngugi and whether we think of writing is the future of African literature going to be in African languages, and then that ties into the second
that's
question
true.
on whether what is. So I think if you're taking, you can just take the two. Yes.
Yeah, just really short answer because we don't have time. I think that when when people say colonization is over, it happened a long time ago, we should get over it. What they don't reckon with is with the legacy of it that lives on. We're here speaking English, right? And the English we're speaking now is Nigerian English, right? Which has its own, it has its own local flavor, right? If you were to go to the UK and ask somebody for swallow, they will look at you like, what is swallow? One swallow and soup. It doesn't mean anything, right? But in Nigeria, you say swallow, people understand what you mean, right? You see Nigerian movies on Netflix, and they are, what's that term called again? Subtitling them. Because your English is local. Your English is, is something different from the English of the US or the English of the UK, right? And I think that, the gate's already open, and that horse has bolted, right? I don't think it's realistic to talk about writing in African languages, because even many of us who speak our own local languages very fluently cannot write in those languages, right? And then even if you were to write in those languages, who is publishing you, right? Anybody who can read Igbo, there's no Igbo, there's no...
She's working on italicizing.
Italicizing, okay. Yeah. Okay, sorry, I didn't understand that. So that's the less interesting question, but anyway, I'll answer it too.
It's house
I think it's a house style. Yeah, so some publishers want you to italicize, and then you decide, okay, am I going to and get the contract, or am I going to fight this? You have to choose your fights, right? And for some people it doesn't really matter. And I also think that the anxiety of italicizing is also something that is very unique to us. I read, you find books by Dutch writers, right? When there's a word in Dutch, it's italicized, they don't discuss it, they don't care. They're like, okay, just sort of shows the difference. It shows, okay, this is a different language that's not in English. When their books get translated, those are italicized. I don't like it because I don't like the look of it. I think it makes a book look untidy. But I don't think it should be as political as we'll understand why it's political sometimes. But I think the anxiety is mostly yours. It's not,
Because we've had that unique history.
Because we've had that unique experience. Okay. Yeah.
All right.
I think it's for the sake of clarity sometimes. This word is not English, so you don't mistake it for an English I think sometimes when it's problematic is when you have at the end of the book a whole glossary
Oh, yeah, that's
trying to
right.
explain
Yes,
all these things. That I don't like, you know? You have to understand the book
That one is racist.
within.
Okay, so final question. Namdi, I wanted you to address the question on whether we see, this sudden interest in, black literary arts as as a fad, one, and two, how do we actually make this interest sustainable? It opens up questions about community, institution building, and, sustainability.
Yeah, I think I've spoken about it earlier as regards ecosystem building. I think literature is becoming way more self-sufficient in the sense that books can be written here and grow and take on a life of its own in Africa alone without it being exposed to the West in the way it was before. So I feel in many ways, there's still a lot of progress to be made, but in many ways we are becoming way more self-sufficient. And just recognizing that, I don't see it being a fad. I see it as growth, as evolution, in a way that we are becoming more robust, like I said earlier, way more institutions, way more collaboration that is open and encouraged, and way more sharing of knowledge, sharing of resources. So I think from here, it can only keep expanding in terms of institutions, in terms of genres, in terms of what we discuss with our peers and do with language individually and collaboratively.
All right, thank you so much. Thank you to this fantastic panel.